times I'd be in a piano bar, like in Norway, where the Bruce Springsteen comes to mind, where I learned that song, The River, because I would show up to these piano bar gigs in different countries, and that country would have certain types of songs that the people liked. And when I'd show up in that country, we'd have like a meeting. Okay, what's the deal with these young kids or this crowd? What kind of things are they really into? And I'd have to learn certain songs in certain places, whether it was Japan or whether it was Scandinavia, etc. And so on those, you wouldn't really hear me play because they didn't want to hear. They wanted to hear their favorite songs. You were a human jukebox. And somewhat of an alcohol salesman.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. We are getting off the Bruce train, though I'm sure he will come up, as he often does. I have my guest, Rick DellaRatta. Yeah. And I can't wait to talk to you. We've already spent a few minutes visiting. Rick, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much.
Tell us a little about yourself.
Sure. Where would I start? That's the thing. I could go all the way back to the beginning, or I could start in the middle.
We will start at the beginning in a minute. So for now, do your elevator pitch.
Really, basically what I am is someone who had a musical upbringing. I became a professional musician, and I traveled around the world, played all kinds of music in all kinds of bands, played quite a few Bruce Springsteen songs in pop bands and wedding bands and top 40 bands. And at some point I got to a situation where I started to do my own records, which were more along the jazz line, because I was a creative improviser, and the piano has so much to offer in the jazz idiom. Then 9/11 came, and basically I started to do something called Jazz for Peace, where I felt like I could take my music and out what my beliefs were as a person, which was that music and the arts could help people. It could heal our country. It could heal our world. It breaks through divisions that people have. It breaks through barriers of language and creed and culture and religion. And it reaches people in a profoundly positive way. And then if I use it to help outstanding causes, now I'm reaching all the people that outstanding cause is helping. So it's a really bizarre thing where it became a personal dream come true, coming from just a horrific tragedy that I happened to witness less than a quarter of a mile away on the roof of my Lower East Side building, where I was living in a 5-floor walk-up on the morning of 9/11. So from the most bizarre day of my life came a poem called Jazz for Peace, which led for this wild opportunity for me to combine my talents with the things I had learned from the arts and culture, which was that we could really solve a lot of our problems just with the arts and culture and helping outstanding causes. So it's been quite a journey.
I can't wait to dive into that. I always like to start at the beginning, though, Rick. You mentioned you grew up. Where'd you grow up? And was there music in the house? Was there music a lot?
Very good question. Yeah, because I grew up in upstate New York, and so that was a part of the middle class and all that. And the whole thing about the Bruce Springsteen thing is really, whereas he was a real middle-class, blue-collar sort of attraction during a time when some problems started to happen with the middle class. And so I grew up there. My parents they both had musical backgrounds. My grandfather was really the one. He came over from Italy with nothing but an accordion and a wine press, and was legendary as a musician during the bootleg era back in the roaring 20s. And my father played the French horn. My mother played the organ in the church, that kind of thing. So when a piano came on Christmas Eve, I thought that Santa had something to do with it. And I started to try to learn it on my own. And it just became a situation where I sensed a silent sort of thing. This piano, if you want to explore that piano, we're not gonna get in your way, kind of thing like that. So it was a safe place for me. And I just thought it was so fascinating, the piano. It's just unbelievable. I felt like with my classical lessons, I was channeling composers in the 1800s. And at the same time, I could also connect with the music on the radio that I was growing up with, and I could just do my own little explorations. So there was a lot to it. The next thing I knew, though, I was playing professionally, and I did have to quit the only job I ever had, which was paper route.
So did you feel, was there a calling? The way you're hearing it, it sounded like the piano spoke to you, right? There was this need. Did it come natural to you?
They said I had talent. It's couldn't be possible because I had my grandfather who was like someone I
Sure.
really admired, looked up to. But then he had talent through his kids, and my father was a talented classical French horn player. My mother did play quite well. She never made a big thing about it, but she played darn well. She would accompany my father on the piano, on the orchestra. Like she would play the orchestra part to the Mozart horn concertos. And she played in the organ in the church. So I would have to say there was quite a bit of musical talent from that aspect of it. I did never really look back once I started hearing like the joy that came from dancing around with my grandmother and aunt to the Beatles and stuff like that. That looks like something I could get behind as a grown-up, which most other things didn't look so good to me. Like was worried about being a grown-up and having to give up things that I liked. But I was like, if I was a grown-up bringing joy to people through music, I think that could be a good transition from childhood, which I enjoyed, not having to be a grown-up.
So are you classically trained?
I am. Because what happened was I was trying to learn the piano on my own, and I got someone told on me or something, and then they, started with me with lessons. So now I had a classical teacher. I didn't really I didn't ask for it, let's put it that way. But since I had it, I thought I would, respect the fact that they were doing that. And then when I started to play that music, I was like, man, that stuff there's something behind that. Chopin, and these are some great people. So I couldn't ignore that. But I did want to get to pop music and the music my friends listened to and all that stuff. I had three things going on. I had my own personal exploration. Then I had the music on the radio when I started playing in bands and stuff. And then I did have the classical thing, which I sensed was a more time-honored way to really become a master of an instrument.
I've been listening to a lot of interviews with Jason Isbell. He's my new musical obsession. And he talked about he just loved playing the guitar. Like it was never practice for him. He just loved playing. So it sounds a little bit like that to you. Like it didn't matter to you whether it was classical, whether you were trying to pick up a pop piece by ear, you just loved playing.
Yeah, I felt like I was following a path. I felt like there was a rudder to my ship when I was musically. Do you know what I mean? I felt like it had a rudder to it. There was a journey going on here. Whereas the other stuff, I was just flailing around. I didn't really sense. It would have been fun to maybe be a professional athlete or something like that. I was looking. The music thing, I felt like I needed to do it. I just felt like I wasn't gonna. That was essential. That was necessary. The musical growth.
Did you study officially, or when you went to school?
Yeah, I eventually got accepted at the New England Conservatory of Music. There was a few music schools that wanted me to go there as I got in that time where you choose a school and all that. And I was offered quite a scholarship in Miami, but I did sense that Boston was an opportunity for me on a lot of levels. They had a jazz program there. They had a classical program that I was accepted into, but they also had a city that had quite a music scene. So I just figured, I don't know, I ended up going there, and it was challenging. It wasn't the party that Miami would have been. I don't know if that would have been the best thing for me. Who knows? 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I figured Boston was a great place for me to really grow as a musician. There was no doubt in my mind.
When did you start performing for other people?
My homeroom teacher, like I said, I had this paper route and I was getting ambitious with that. But then my homeroom teacher wanted, his sons played guitar. He had two sons played. Maybe one played bass, one played guitar. I can't remember. But he wanted me to play in their band that was playing the school dances. So I joined that band. Now I'm in that band. Then there was a grown-up band that was going to sneak me in and out of wherever they were going to go, private parties, weddings, bars, whatever. They had jobs and they were going to sneak me in and out. And they were like, don't worry, we'll pick you up. We'll drive you home. And they won't throw you out whether you're underage or not, because there'll be no keyboard player if they do that. So I had that thing going on. And then my mother was like, she wanted me to take over for her at the church. And then that was the end of my only job, my only other job. I had to give up the paper routes.
One of the things I'm smiling at is there is a local guy here in Dallas that is a pretty well known, in fact, he's a Texas Hall of Fame broadcaster. He's done sports talk for years, but he also was in a lot of bands in the 60s.
Okay.
And he still plays like in a Tom Petty tribute band, and so he does. But when he was in high school, and by the way, I laughed because they'll say, why did you not watch this TV show? And he'll say, because I was in bands and stuff. The exact same phrase you just used, right? I didn't watch Star Wars. I was busy playing in bands and stuff. But he tells the story that Stevie Ray Vaughan showed up to try out for his band.
Wow.
This was when Stevie was very young.
Mm.
And the joke, the other co-host, is that you said he wasn't good enough to be in your band, right? Because they didn't hire him. And when he gets them to quit picking at him, he says, the reality is we could tell this kid was miles ahead of what we were. But him being 15, it was just going to be too damn hard to get him into bars where we were playing. The logistics wasn't worth the headache. Right. But it's a funner story if you go, oh, no, you said Stevie Ray Vaughan wasn't good enough for your band. Were you ever tempted to do something besides music for a living, Rick?
I can't really say I was. There were things I was interested in, hobbies. I love sports. I love skiing to this day. I love playing basketball. I didn't really see myself getting in the NBA. If I thought I could get in a professional sports team or something like that, that might have been something that I would have considered. Music is so encompassing, as that radio announcer was alluding to. It can really take up a lot. I love acting, for example. And now I do some acting. I actually did a scene for somebody just a couple days ago. An agent called me and wanted me to do a scene playing a club owner. And I had to do the scene on the thing and send it. And I have an acting resume because of that. But only in the last few years have I been able to entertain acting, because that can be a 24-hour-a-day thing, dealing with auditions. So you have to make choices. And I felt like music I had to do, and the other things were optional. And if I could do them with music, or I could squeeze it in, that would be fine. But the music thing, it really is a lot. It's a handful.
You mentioned writing. Was that something that was always there, or did that come later as you were learning that you decided, I want to write music myself?
I was right from when I was starting to learn the instrument. I wanted to figure out the piano on my own. When I very first started, I wanted to figure it out all by myself. That never left me. And there's something compositional to that, even to improvising, where when you're trying to do something, it's like a communication between you and the instrument that's almost sacred. And it's compositional in nature. So there was a compositional element to me, and I would win strange little awards. Like at a summer music camp, I was voted most creative. And when I was in college and I did my undergraduate in piano performance, a well-known composer in that school mentored me, and he said, listen, I can get you scholarships if you want to stay. You could do a master's in jazz composition. There was people recognizing my compositional skills.
When did you, or if we had to put a label on during that part of your career, what kind of musician were you?
I wanted to play all kinds of music. One, because I liked all kind of music, but also just because I felt like I had the best chance to make a living in music if I could play anything. So I
Yeah.
was very happy to play anything and everything. And when I was in school, I was playing gigs all the time, every night with this kind of band, with that kind of band. After a while, I got to the point where I realized I'm never going to really get too far in jazz unless I narrow it down and just become a jazz artist. And then I had a problem where I sang, I improvised, and I composed. And I was never in completely in my element as a sideman because I was supporting whatever that thing was.
Sure.
So I was like, no one's really going to hear me in a full context unless I become a band leader. So now I started to do my own records where you could hear my compositions, you could hear me improvising, and you could hear me doing vocals and stuff like that. So otherwise, I was doing a mix of things, a wild mixed bag. Sometimes I'd be playing in a jazz band, a jazz fusion type of band where they were featuring my compositions. Other times I'd be in a band backing up a vocalist where I was being featured as a improviser. And then other times I'd be in a piano bar, like in Norway, where the Bruce Springsteen comes to mind, where I learned that song, The River, because I would show up to these piano bar gigs in different countries, and that country would have certain types of songs that the people liked. And when I'd show up in that country, we'd have like a meeting. Okay, what's the deal with these young kids or this crowd? What kind of things are they really into? And I'd have to learn certain songs in certain places, whether it was Japan or whether it was Scandinavia, etc. And so on those, you wouldn't really hear me play because they didn't want to hear. They wanted to hear their favorite songs. You were a human jukebox and somewhat of an alcohol salesman.
First off, Max Weinberg does that currently, right? He tours with the juice box that they do. You had teased that you had something ready for me. And if this is a good time, why don't we do that because based on what you just said, I think that's a great transition. If you could do this, then we'll come back and talk some more.
Okay, that sounds great. So now here's the example. So I did show up, so I was in, like I said, I've been a lot of places as a piano bar entertainer. One of the places was Oslo, Norway. So I get to, what happened was, this is a crazy story now. I'm in New York. I had come to New York to play, and I'm playing in a club in New York, in Chelsea, right on 8th. It's a really cool hotspot. And they had this guy who was blind, a black blind guy named Teddy. He was upstairs. So they had him upstairs. Then downstairs, they had me and my girlfriend at the time alternating with this other piano bar entertainer named Nate. So Nate, as time goes on, he's telling me that he's got some Scandinavian girlfriend. And do I know any agents? Because he knew that I had been traveling to doing these kinds of things. I give him the name of an agent, and he ends up months later now, he comes to me and he had found some other agent or whatever. And he said, listen, here's the thing. I found somebody who wants to bring me, but he wants to bring all of us. I said, what are you talking about? He said he wants you and he wants Teddy. So this is the craziest thing now. Some agent in Oslo, Norway, took me, Nathan, and the upstairs guy, Teddy, and brought us all the way to the capital of Norway, but in the same proximity of each other, where basically in the middle of Norway was a piano bar called Baron's that had an upstairs where they put Teddy. They put Nathan downstairs. And then right next to it was another piano bar, and they put me in that one. So we were moved directly. They just moved us in the same proximity, like 7,000 miles away. I don't know how many miles. I'd have to look that up, but whatever thousands of miles it was. When I got there, we had to figure out some songs. And one of the songs was like, they really liked this song by Bruce Springsteen called The River. So I had to learn it specifically for that gig. And what I'm gonna do is play a little bit of what I do now. I'm just gonna make something up as an improviser, and then I'm gonna lead into this little bit shortened version of the River, so I can fit both of these in.
Sounds perfect.
Okay. go down to the river. Into the river we dive. Oh, down to the river we ride. And I got married pregnant. Man, that was all she wrote. And for my 19th birthday, I got a union card and a wedding coat. We went down to the courthouse and the judge put it all to rest. No wedding day smile, no walk down the aisle, no flower, no wedding dress. But I remember us riding my mother's car, light and tan and red down at the reservoir. And out of those banks on Lowry, put up close just to feel its rusty take. Now those memories come back to haunt me. They haunt me like a curse. Is a dream alive, it don't come true, or is it something worse? It sends me down to the river. Though I know the river is dry, sends me down to the river tonight. Down to the river, my baby and I go down to the river.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was absolutely beautiful. It is, that is, I have a couple of interesting stories about the river. One, I often wonder is, would they say the characters in the song, is it a successful marriage?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a perfect marriage, but is a successful marriage, right?
Uh-huh.
And in real life, his sister is still married to that. They're still married. I mean, that they, yeah, that he based it on her to his, and her and her husband are still married.
Oh, really? Okay, now is this the same Mary that's in the song you're going to ask me about later?
Don't know. See,
Aha, okay.
that is one of the theories when
That-
we'll talk about it, is Mary is a character that he speaks often.
Okay.
And there is, are they all the same Marys? Are
And
they
no one's
different
ever really
Marys?
asked him about it, huh? No one's ever.
No, yeah. And the other, on a lighter note,
Mm-hmm.
I was at a show in Nashville and someone had a sign. And for a while, Bruce was taking sign requests. And someone said, "It's my 19th birthday, play the river." And we were like, you realize it's not that happy of a song, right? This is not a yay, I'm 19. But I love your version of it. I love the introduction. That was very well done. Very well done. Nicely done. Did you ever think about why in that section of Europe that song, they loved it so much?
There's a couple of things. One is that countries at that time, okay, so this is a twofold thing because one is related to the lyrics of the song and the other one is related to just what was going on at that time. You like if you went to Japan, as I did, I would find out in Japan that Elton John wasn't that popular in Japan, but Billy Joel was. Why? Because the publishing companies had inroads at that country for that artist. Whereas if you go to another artist, the publishing company was in there. They weren't in there. So it was politics. They were able to get this guy's music into this country and that guy's music into that country. And certain artists were definitely in Norway, like Neil Young was much more prevalent in Scandinavia than he was in Asia for whatever reason. Nobody really would ever make a request for a Neil Young song in Asia, but there was one or two of his songs that they really liked in Scandinavia. The other thing was this song talks about the problems that they had. So this song, to me, they're young, they're enjoying life, and they have these memories of the river, and then they get married, and then these problems come up. And in the verse that I didn't sing because I did a shorter version, he screams about a problem with the economy. That problem with the economy, in other words, like on account of the economy, he's having a problem. But that was a problem with a part of the economy that was the blue collar worker. And that's related to NAFTA, it seems to me. And it seems to me that what resonated with this song with a lot of people was that he was calling out this NAFTA thing that was going on, where they were basically, corporations were outsourcing. They were outsourcing jobs to cheaper places, and they were screwing over the American worker, because unless the American worker was willing to bend, they weren't going to be able to compete with third world countries, where they were just have the workers with no rights and no pay in these third world countries. And that's what I think and that's what was screwing up their marriage, because that's a big problem when you have
financial problems. Yes, absolutely.
Right, because the thing is, he's already making a compromise in the song. Yeah. He's making a compromise to get that job at the Johnstown company, right? And that compromise for the love and all that, but now that gets screwed up. Now he's making a compromise, but the compromise he's making betrays him. And what he was betrayed was, to me, he was betrayed by this outsourcing of jobs, where these greedy corporations just saw a chance to make, even though they had enough, and even though the worker was willing to work with them and give them enough, record profits didn't matter. They wanted a bigger record. It was greed, and the politicians were betraying the American people, and the American middle class got betrayed.
Yeah, and what I also think is interesting is that the universal of there ain't much work because of the economy. This came out in 80.
Yeah,
you can sing it in the 90s. Yeah, but I'm just saying, to this day, when he can sing that line, there are people that is universal, because there's always problem in the economy if you are at that working class. And you're right, the implication is, I got a union car and a wedding coat, right? Would our narrator gone to college? Maybe, but he couldn't. He's now got a child on the way. He's got a wife. He has to depend, and therefore you put aside your dreams and put in other ones. And which has that, you did sing that great line, is a dream alive that don't come true, or is it something worse?
Right.
And that is, just it's in there.
Yeah.
I ask this when I have Springsteen fans on the podcast. So I'll ask you, Rick, if you remember when you first heard Bruce or his music, and what your thoughts were about this singer-songwriter?
I basically, in New York, there was a situation when I first came from Boston to New York. I brought a car, which was a 1969 Chevy Biscayne, and that was a crazy car. It was like too big to park in New York, but it was what I had. And I was able to play a lot of gigs, but a lot of the gigs I ended up getting this gig where I was basically the weekend vocalist at the singer piano player, but in a band. It was like a top 40 band that had a singer, but the singer was more a crooner and sang the 50s stuff and didn't really sing the top 40 stuff of the day. And so I became that guy on the weekends when it was packed. They wanted to hear the songs. And so I would sing the Born in the USA and some of these songs by Bruce Springsteen. And I didn't think all that much of those specific hits, but I saw that he had an appeal with this blue collar thing. And I did see it when I learned The River. I did see the appeal that he had. And of course, there's a few other songs where he also brings that home. I mainly was heard about him mostly because he was, it's weird because here he was singing about the blue collar people, but he also was the corporate man in terms of the record labels. Some record labels, the record labels, I found out later, would choose maybe one artist when there were 5 competing bands and bury the other bands alive so that they wouldn't compete against each other and cause that one artist to lose his. So Bruce was the man that the record labels were behind.
I love the fact you mentioned earlier in the interview that you were diverse the same way like an investor divest his portfolio. You divested your musical styles so that you would be more accessible and employable. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
The thing is, once I quit my paper route, I was already making a living as a musician, even though I was a young kid and I didn't have to pay rent at my house.
Yeah.
But I was like, there's no sense in turning back at this level. Even though I'm going to school, I had the ability to play in different settings. And the school had something called the gig office. And I made out like a bandit there because when I got in there, they would post these gigs that people would call in from the city of Boston, and they would be like, one person needed a wedding band, another person needed someone to play for silent movies, another person needed all kinds of wild stuff that people needed, and I would go up and just nab those things. And I figured, not only am I providing a service, but I'm also getting more experience as a versatile musician. And so I became a very versatile musician, which allowed me to never really have to turn back. Now, the problem was that I kept growing as a musician, as an artist, and that became a problem because now I'm becoming more able to play at a higher level. But then as you play at that higher level, the audience gets smaller and smaller. When I was checking out some of Bruce's music, I was like, man, I was looking at like Little Stevie or whatever, and I'm like, boy, that's not a very challenging gig to play. You're just playing these triads and rocking along, and that sounds like fun. I was developing way beyond that and into a much more challenging situation where there's a much smaller market and a much smaller people for that. Nevertheless, my artistic journey was going in that direction, just like you see with the writers, the great writers and great composers. Mozart wrote like 52 symphonies and apparently got buried in a pine box. So
right,
go figure.
So you already mentioned going overseas. I want to get to Jazz for Peace, but before I do that, I want to just, if you have any stories about strange gigs to share with me, I would love to hear some of them.
There's so many. I don't know where to start, but one that came with The River was, I remember one time I learned The River and a few other songs that I needed to play for that thing. Like I said, there was a Neil Young song. There was I think there was a Bob Marley song in that mix. There was a handful of songs that you needed for this piano bar gig. And I remember doing a set in that piano bar and getting off the gig. And it was like late. I think I played till 3 in the morning or something. And it was maybe 1:30. And I was just walking, I don't know, it was dark, and I just felt another hand in my hand. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And I look over, and it's a girl, a rather young girl, old enough to be in the bar. Now, I wasn't breaking the law or nothing, but she was old enough to be in the bar, but she was a young, very attractive girl. She was the kind of girl that could put her hand in someone's hand and get away with it. Nobody is good. Yeah, no one is gonna.
No one's complaining. Yes.
No one will ever complain when this girl puts her hand in your hand. That's the bottom. That's the kind of girl it was. And there was this little downstairs where you could go down, and then before you got to the restroom, there was like a little makeout place or whatever. And I just ended up, and that's one of the memories of The River, was just that girl. It brought back those memories. And the funny thing was, because I played so many gigs. I was already had somewhat of a reputation as a jazz musician. So
Yeah.
they wanted me to meet the top jazz musician in Norway. Over there, they didn't really have to play all kinds of music in some of those other countries. If you were a good jazz musician, you were known in the country and blah, blah, blah. And there was this guy, I think his name was Håkon Graff or something. He was a serious jazz musician. And
Okay.
we went out and stuff. And I just remembered he's asking me like, what do you do? I said, look, I do all kinds of gigs because New York City, it's hard, really hard to, you got to play everything. You got to do all kinds of stuff. You can't just, and he knew that too, but I was just trying to tell him the difference. And we get back to the flat that they gave me.
Yeah.
And we get back there and there's a body crumpled up by the door. And it's that beautiful girl who had put her hand in my hand and she just decided to sleep next to my door until I got back there. And
Oh my goodness.
yeah. And so I just remembered, like, what must this guy be thinking? Like, because that's just so beyond his, you know what I mean? His like conception. And even
Sure.
mine, you know? So it was funny. It was like we got back and I opened the door and she just got up and she just walked in the flat and just went over into my room and just went and crawled into the bed while me and him hung out, finishing up our conversation or whatever in the living room. And I was just trying to think of what must be going through his mind because it's got to be so foreign to his life in more the jazz and the more serious music world. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
and you're like,
in the rock star world.
and you're trying to go, oh yeah, this happens all the time.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's what I was wondering. What's this guy be thinking?
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
So I thank you. That's a perfect story. We're gonna try not to give anyone whiplash, but you said that Jasper Peace was born on 9/11. Take me through a little bit of that. My story was I I had been having a lot of headhunters and recruiters call me asking for me to, are you interested in a job? Are you interested in a job? I reached out to my wife. In her job, they had them do professional resumes. A service had done a professional resume. So I asked Linda, I said, do you mind if I pay to get a resume done? She goes, no, I think it's a great idea. I had gotten a phone call and they said the resumes are ready to pick up. I said, okay, great. I'm driving to pick up and I stop at an Einstein's Bakery, one of the chains, picked up a bagel and some coffee, and I'm in the car and I'm listening to the sports station and they talk about, yeah, it sounds like there's been a plane hit the tower. And we're like, oh, and then I heard them say, oh, that's way too low. That's not an accident. So I get to, and it was the person working on the resume, they worked out of their home. So it's on the TV.
Mhm.
And he hands me the resume and neither one of us are in the mood to look at it. But for the longest time, my resume was Jesse Jackson, 09, 11, 2001, right? Because he had dated it.
Wow.
And so then, of course, the economy went to hell and no one was calling for jobs after I'd paid for a resume. And I'm living in Dallas, Texas, and the world is shocked. And in a lot of ways, I think we're still feeling the repercussions of that. So you're there in New York. Tell me the story. Talk to me about that and where we went.
Well, on the 9/10, on the 10th of that, the day before, I was in a situation where this is something that happens, maybe not in every city, but in New York, it'll happen, where photographers or amateur photographers can just go up to someone that they think might be famous or something someday or whatever, and just say to them, hey, do you want some pictures and I'll keep the negatives or whatever. And the person will, of course, say yes. And some photographers have they got their start in photography or their pictures became well known. Linda McCartney's a perfect example. She was Linda
Right.
East before that. But she took pictures of Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix walking around with their guitar in Washington Square Park when they were nobody really. And she had the pictures. And then next thing you know, she's a famous photographer. And then she met Paul McCartney. Anyway, this woman was, for whatever reason, she was taking pictures of me and giving me the negatives. And she took pictures of me. And if you ever see the CD called Jazz for Peace, it's a CD. That picture is a picture that she took of me in front of a dumpster in the East Village on the 10th of September. So she
Okay.
took a picture on the 10th. And basically, the next morning, I just got a phone call. It was just a phone call in the morning, and the phone rang, and I answered it, and it was her. And she said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know who to call." She was frazzled. I said, "Well, what is it? No problem. You don't have to." She said, "We spent some time yesterday and blah, blah, blah." "Yeah, no problem. You can call me. What's going on?" And she just says the situation where her son or her boss talks to his son every day. And on this day, the son called the boss and said, "Hey, something happened." He was in the other building.
Hmm.
Something happened in the other building. And what should he do? Should he go down? And finally, they talked, and he said, "You know what? Why don't you just leave that building just as a precaution?" He never saw his son again. And
Oh
yeah, and
no.
she was frazzled. She didn't really know that he was never going to see him again, but she was just at that point, she was privy to
Sure.
what was going on. She calls me, and I said, "Listen, let me just go up because I'm on the fifth floor walk up. I'll just go up on the roof. It's right over here. I'm just 3 steps away, right up on the roof. And let me just see what it is. What could it be? Come on, some idiot
Yeah.
is cat. What could it possibly be?" I went up there, and that I felt like I walked into a movie because I had a luxury box office view. I was less than a quarter of a mile away, and I was
Mm.
on a roof, and I was direct sight, and it was just insane. So out of that came a poem that I wrote, and I called the poem Jazz for Peace. And that's where everything took on a life of its own, because now I have this life-changing event that I have something that's unique from because you don't really realize that you saw something that so few people saw to your, you know what I mean? The rest of the
Sure.
world, everyone saw it on, but I saw it like incredibly. So I experienced it in a way that only so few people did. At that time, I thought everybody did. Now you realize the whole world, out of the whole world, you were one of the tiny group of people that actually saw it at this
Yeah.
extent. So I had a poem, the words came out of me. And what do you do with a poem? I have no idea. But as you mentioned, the whole country was shut down. And when it opened up, I happened to be the headliner at a jazz festival in Savannah, Georgia, where there was going to be 8,500 people. And I was the headline act, like I said. So what do I do next? I guess I'll read that poem, because that was the first thing that people could go to since 9/11 was in Georgia, was that festival. So they went to that festival, and that was the first time they were with other people. And I read the poem, and so the poem reverberated, and it was like one thing after another. So now I write the poem on 9/11. I read the poem on whatever it was, the 27th or 26th, and then I had put the poem to music by the next high profile gig. And that one ended up with the press putting DellaRatta Starts Out with Jazz for Peace. Then, even before that, there was a reporter who called me and wanted me to read the poem. And then, during that time, I'm just talking to him off the top of my head. And I just happened to say, honestly, if we would just embrace our greatest qualities, creativity, artistry, intellectuality, if we embraced our greatest qualities as a species, we would have a better chance at avoiding the behavior that leads to destruction. I just said off the top of my head, I wouldn't have even remembered I said it, except it ended up in this article that got lifted by famous quotes websites. And next thing I know, I'm on hundreds of websites with this famous quote. If you Google Rick DellaRatta famous quote, this thing comes up in every language. So that's going on. The press is writing about this piece I wrote. And so now I figure, let me play a few concerts around town, just call them Jazz for Peace. And then that led to a benefit concert series. Then eventually the United Nations, where I had asked my manager, "Listen, why don't you just show them who I am, go through the prompts and see if they would let me unite Israeli, Palestinians, and American musicians," which I was able to do at the United Nations. It was one thing, another thing. And it just, like I said, it was almost like the same way that music was a trajectory for me. I felt like there was a rudder on my ship. I now had a new rudder. Maybe I had a cruise ship rudder at this point, but I had a rudder on my rudder, is what you might want to say.
By the way, I did just quote, and you're right. If you put
Yeah,
your name in that quote, pop,
crazy.
it just, you're like, what? Okay.
And I'll be honest with you, for years, I thought I must have done something to have that happen. I must have sent that quote to someone, or I did something, because we try so hard. We are always trying hard, and all that trying is good. But the bottom line is that was just a crazy thing where I said something and it got lifted, and I had nothing to do with that. I didn't know about famous quote sites. So I was
Yeah.
gaslighted into thinking I had something to do with it. But when I really had to think of it, I'm like, I never even knew I said the thing in the first place. So it's just a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon unexplained.
So your comment is going around. So what what was the thought of getting a little more organized and doing Jazz for Peace? Talk
Well,
about
here's what happened. Basically, I was visiting a roommate of mine on the Upper West Side, an ex-roommate that he had a rent controlled apartment. And the
Mhm.
reason I ended up in his place is because he needed a piano player, and he figured he'd give me some cheap rent in his rent controlled apartment. And so that was before I ended up down on the Lower East Side. But anyway, that was my first apartment in the city. When I first came down, I was in Jersey City. Then it was his. So I'm visiting him, and he's, yeah, there's this place around the corner. Why don't you check it out? It's a youth hostel, and it's called Jazz on the Park. But the guy's name was Jazz, Jaz.
Yeah.
I go over there, and I'm like, hey, how would you guys like a little jazz maybe in your basement? Because I realized they didn't realize, but I realized all I got to do is put another Z on this guy's name. And it looks like, and not only that, but the street 106th Street had also been named Duke Ellington Boulevard. So now I had this venue for my little Jazz for Peace concerts. And then I'm like, why don't I do something philanthropic, living up to the words of the poem, and help a few outstanding causes in the city? I'll do a benefit concert for a few outstanding causes in New York City. And that just ballooned because I didn't realize there were over 60,000 nonprofits in New York City. Now, separating the real ones from the fake ones was a whole nother thing, which Jazz for Peace ended up doing. But like I said, these doors just opened that I didn't even know. And I started doing the benefit concerts in New York. And because of that venue, I was able to do a lot of them just down in the basement. People say, where's the concert? I said, it's over at Jazz on the Park. What's Jazz on the Park? It's over on Duke Ellington Park. And then they thought that it was them that didn't know what was going on, not me, because I was using everything lined up. It's on Duke Ellington Boulevard. It's called Jazz on the Park. In all honesty, it was a dingy little basement of a youth hostel. But I got somebody at Beethoven Pianos to, again, sponsor a piano. They moved a piano down there for me to do the concerts. And then what happened was I get a call. Presidential candidate Dennis Kucinich is visiting New York, and on his itinerary, he wants to come to a Jazz for Peace concert. So it became like a tourist attraction.
Wow.
And I'm like, does this guy know that I'm in a basement of a? He didn't know, but I was like, nothing I could do. I'm just gonna have to fake it. So then I started doing the concerts all around New York, and the next thing I know, I was doing like my 200th or whatever, and they're reading this thing, and it's all about me. While me and the band are over on the side having some hors d'oeuvres or whatever, and they're making these announcements before we come on to do the concert, and they're reading this big proclamation. I'm like, what the heck? Will you guys be quiet so I can hear this? They wouldn't shut up. I just had to go and listen because it sounded like it was about me. The other guys in the band, they're just shooting the crap and having fun. Let me hear this. And it turned out it was from Mayor Bloomberg. And it was a big letter that he wrote proclaiming New York commends all blah, blah, blah. I'm like, where did you guys get that? Oh, yeah, the mayor, he loves what you're doing. Here, take this letter. And it was just, so then I started to realize when I would hit these milestones, I would get these letters. When I hit my 500th concert, it was in Chicago, and I got a letter from Barack Obama. Then I started doing these all over the world, and I would get a letter from the Prime Minister of Kenya when I went to Africa. And
Sure.
so people started to come, and a lot of them were referring to my United Nation concert, which got no press. I did everything I could. I sent out press releases. I did nothing to get that famous quote except say something off the top of my head that ended up in an article. The press, for the United Nations, I said press release to everybody. Nobody showed up. Nobody cared about peace. But as the benefit concert series resonated, then they started to notice and that in their eyes, that was a significant cultural event that I did at the United Nations. And this thing I'm doing has significance, and they started to believe what I thought originally. And that happens sometimes. And that's the way it is in the arts too. A lot of these great artists, whether it's Mozart or whatever, hey, unfortunately, it's not that they weren't great. It's just that the public took so long and to come around that they were already dead by the time the public figured them out, came around. If you go to Vienna, funny, because I was on a podcast earlier today from Vienna. It's called Vienna Live. But if you go to Vienna, you'll see Mozart getting a gig that he qualified for in 1731. A joke, but right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, he qualified for the gig in 1731, but they didn't give it to him then. He died penniless. But now he's a big star in Vienna. So that's just, these are just parts, these are just the uniqueness, the unique crazy ride of our existence. But like I said, I was glad that I learned every kind of music. One, so that I could support myself no matter what and ride them. But also it makes you a better musician. It just makes you a better, more well-rounded musician to be able to just do anything.
Yeah.
I remember someone calling me up, hey, listen, what do you got from, okay, listen, go into this club. They'll have a keyboard set up for you. It's a country band. And just go in there and just walk on the stage and just they'll have the charts for you and just read their show and then just walk out. Someone will hand you an envelope. I still don't even know the name of that band. I walked, the place was packed with people. I made the band sound really good. I don't know who they are to this day. They could be a band that's famous now. I didn't even know. They hired me to just go in and make them sound good. Like it was a special gig and they figured I was going to make them, I was going to soup up their, you know what I mean? Or they needed someone to do that and my name came. So all kinds of wild things like that. I don't regret any of it.
What's next? I know you're joining me on this podcast, but what are you wanting to go? What is the next step for Jazz for Peace? And what's next for you career-wise?
Okay. Interesting you should ask because these podcasts, okay, so we got in a situation where it took 20 years, but after 20 years of me doing all these things with Jazz for Peace, all of a sudden, podcasting comes out and people need content. And they look at my story and man, it resonates. Now they get it. I don't know where they were before, or maybe they didn't even have podcasts back then. Who knows? But these podcasters like you guys are like, hey, and I love it because you have the freedom to choose what you want to do. It's a wonderful outlet for you. It's freedom of speech. I love the whole idea. But they're like, oh, can you come on and we'd love to tell your story. And this is my desk. A lot of they interview these podcasters at their workplace. This piano is my work.
Sure, absolutely.
And they love the idea that I play something. And then again, because I can play so many things, I can play something that's related to that podcast or that theme. I was on Prince's fan club podcast. Prince and playing totally different music than what you heard today. But anyway, so now I've done a lot of solo performing. And to be honest with you, up until before this podcasting role started, I shied away from a solo appearance because I just felt like I wanted my other musicians. I needed my bass player. I need my drummer. I like a horn. I love to play with the ensembles and all that. But through this podcasting thing, it's fascinating because there are some things that I can do breaking up the time and the tempo. I don't know if I did as much of it for you, but if you listen to some other podcast, listen to the one in Vienna, because that was, for you, I wanted to do something special for your podcast. But for
thank you.
Vienna, he wanted something quite adventurous. And you'll hear me like going in and out of time, doing things that the musicians couldn't do. So before it was a hamstring because I couldn't do what my bass player and drummer could give me. But now, because I've been on over 100 of these podcasts, this is like maybe the 120th podcast or something I've been on. Yeah. And I'm doing things that actually they wouldn't be able to do with, I'm doing some unique.
Sure.
So I think it's leading to a situation like yesterday where there was an arts and cultural event and they thought it would be great if maybe I could finagle a way to do it. And I said, you know what? I could do your thing if you just have a piano and a microphone and I just come down myself. You know what I mean? Rather than a situation where, some of the guys I play with are big names and we wouldn't be able to amortize it. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I was able to just go there myself and they loved it. And so I think it's going to be a situation for a minute now where I take what I've grown, the musical growth from these podcast performances, and deliver those to audiences live. I think I see that as a possible thing next. And yesterday was an example of it. And that's on YouTube. They put like a couple minutes of it on YouTube
Okay.
today. So
All right.
you'll just see me. Basically, they announce me as they normally would, with maybe whether even if I had an orchestra, but it was just me and making it happen.
So, how about if someone wants more information, how do
Mhm.
they find it?
A great way to get in touch with me personally and with to find out if you like Jazz for Peace, if you know the mission and what that's been going is as the simple email is just info@jazzforpeace.org. And of
Okay.
course, jazzforpeace.org being the website. Me personally, my website, rickdellarata.com. You have to be able to spell my name. But so those are easy ways. And like I said, generic email address is just a great way
Okay.
for someone to say, hey, I watched the Springsteen podcast and blah, blah, blah. And I'd love for you to come out to play at our little thing because I
Okay.
could come out solo and do that where I couldn't do
Sure.
it before. Or they might say, hey, we have this thing in the community that you could come and do a concert to support or something like that.
Okay. That sounds
Sure.
great.
Mhm.
What have I not asked you that I should have?
Wow. Geez, I don't know. That's a good question. Just because you're in Texas, I guess I could tell you a couple of something that maybe I could maybe think of something that I did in Texas. I've been to Dallas a few times, and I've been to
Okay.
Houston even more times. A
Sure.
bunch of times to Houston. The Houston thing is interesting because I used to play with a band called the Platters that were famous in the 1950s, and
Sure.
they're coming from Houston on a cruise ship that remembered me from the Platters when I
Oh,
played
how
on a
funny.
cruise ship, and she kept following my career. And when I started coming to Houston, her and her husband would meet me at the airport and pick me up and stay at their place and party with them all weekend and take me to my gig and hang out and all that stuff. So that was
Yeah.
a real fun thing for Houston. The Dallas thing was cool because there was a few different organizations that I did with Jazz for Peace. And the last time I was in Dallas, it turned out a friend of mine who's a bass player, because North Texas State has a well-known, I don't know if you know this, but they have this well-known, it's called the 1 o'clock big band or something. It's a world
Yeah.
famous jazz big
Yeah.
band. And
It's like the 5 o'clock jazz band or something, but yes,
there
it is. North Texas State is considered one of the best music schools in
you
the
got it.
country, not just Texas. Yes, I do know
Got it.
that. Yeah.
Got it. 100%. So what happened there was they get guys from New York to come down there because they will. You can lure a guy out of New York City down
Yeah.
there because of that reputation. And there's a
Right.
bass player named Lynn Seaton, bass player, and there's another guy too there was 2 or 3 guys from New York, and he got I think the conductor from that, and he's a professor there now and all that, and he put like a band together of those North Texas State guys behind.
Okay.
So it was me and the North Texas State guys, but actually I knew the bass player from New York and we had done gigs in New York and we were
Okay.
close friends and all that. So I had a blast the last time I was in Texas, to be honest with you.
We would love to have you back anytime. So that
Yeah,
sounds great.
let's cross our fingers on that.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
can get that around. Maybe someone will check out your podcast and hey,
Yeah.
Rick. It could be, like I said, it could be a Jazz for Peace thing. Like I've been to Texas a few times where we help an outstanding cause through our benefit concert series. And like I said, it's info@jazzforpeace.org. Or they could say, hey, we have this little music fest and we'd love for you to just sneak in here and play. We'll provide you with a keyboard and a mic and just come down and be one of the acts.
That sounds awesome. I love that. All right, Rick, this has been so much fun. Thank you for the musical treat. I loved hearing your version of The River. I'll include the link to your website on the show notes. I'll include your email address. But before I get out of here, I end every podcast with a Mary question.
Okay.
Jay Armstrong is a honors English teacher he is now retired, but when he was teaching, he would give his class, his honors English class, the lyrics to Thunder Road. And he would ask them to read it. They'd talk about the themes, the choice of lyrics that Bruce uses. And then he would ask his class, does Mary get in the car at the end of the song? That is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
My answer to that, which I had ready before we came on the show, but you altered it a little bit yourself, but it boils down to basically based on what my review was. I'm going to say if, and we don't know for sure, if it's the same Mary from The River, if it's the same Mary, then I'm going to say yes, if it's that Mary. But then again, you said it's no one has ever, he's never let, Bruce has never let the cat out of the bag as to if it's the same Mary, right?
Yeah. No, and so I think that's a great answer, right? Because of course she gets in the car because then they wouldn't get married in the river. So yes, of course she gets in the car. That is great. Thank you again for being part of this. I just loved visiting with you. Listeners, go check out the website. Any final thoughts? And then we'll get you out of here.
I'm actually psyched for people to hear because the music on your podcast is so unique because of your theme. So I'm actually looking forward to sharing me doing a Bruce Springsteen song with people who I'm telling you, have never heard me play that.
Yeah, I am psyched.
I have heard that, and who the hell knows how long ago that was?
Yeah, what I'm going to do is actually I'll put this episode out in about a month, but I think as a clip, I'm going to cut out just the story and you playing it and put that on YouTube as a preview of the full discussion. So I'll try to do that by next week. I think that'd be fun.
Oh, that'll be a blast. That'll be
So once I have it, I'll let you know.
Oh,
all right. All right, listeners, thank you so much for listening. Check out Rick's website. Check out Jazz for Peace. Let's be kind. Let's be safe. And we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.